GT63s in for what's probably going to turn out to be electrical diagnosis. One issue being all the driver assistance systems are not working, like the multifunction camera, the rain light sensors, parking assist, stuff like that. And the other unrelated fault he's having is a very low boost. It's about half, like 40% boost pressure under full throttle, which is odd. Only sometimes though. So it tells me it can't really be anything mechanical. It's something electrical with the boost system or something limiting power. So we're gonna get both of those figured out for him. Just doing the normal inspection in the engine bay now. The whole process I always do whenever I inspect cars is start in the engine bay and then lift it up and do suspension and fluid leaks or anything like that. So I just look around for things. I check the fan bearing. It feels good. You can't see a whole lot in these engines at all, but with the engine cover off, it helps a bit. The oil cap's broke somehow. That's pretty rare to see. Plastic is very brittle. I don't see any fluid leaks. This generation of engine is really good on not having leaks unless it's been opened before. Then like maybe the sealant wasn't put on very well. I don't see anything down there. I kind of look for things like this clip isn't clipped back in. It's supposed to go here. So maybe if this thing has had air filters replaced before, that has to come off to take these boxes off. Maybe someone just forgot to hook that up. Or spark plugs have ever been done. You can see the original zip ties are this, that orangish hued zip tie. So I know that wiring harness has never been disconnected. There's usually one around this connector, which is one of the coil packs. So I know that's been out before, so it's probably had spark plug service at some point. Maybe, oh, there it is right there. It's broken, still inside the engine bay. These are the OEM zip ties. Okay, everything looks so good up here. No alarming signs, no telltale signs of someone being deep inside the engine. Everything's clipped back in properly. So now for the underside. Now to the underside of everything here. I always start at each corner and go wheel by wheel and then do all the drivetrain stuff afterwards. Initially, I see something was hit pretty aggressively here and tore up the back part of the rear undershield and one of the side shields. It has 3 undershields. So one, 2, 3. And a lot of the AMGs will have a metal center undershield to try to keep the bottom of the engine more protected. I can tell immediately this control arm is very binding. Compared on the other side, it's the same way. I think these are put in. That's very soft. I think they're put in backwards. A lot of times sway bars will be like this, and like your sway bar end links will be directional. It's also covered in axle grease, so that tells me this boot is busted. Let's see, spin it around. Oh yeah, there it is. See this section of the boot's torn right there. So it's slung out all the grease. And on a rainy day like this one, you're gonna have water get up in there and wash out all the grease. It's only a matter of time before that axle fails. That's too much grease in my opinion to try to repair that. I would never do that. So that's gonna need an axle. You can get boot kits a lot of these times if you catch it early. But the amount of grease that's out of that thing, I don't know how much wear has occurred inside there. So yeah, you can tell these control arms are definitely on the wrong side. This one's slanted out of this kind of ways angle, and you can tell if it was on this side, it matches the knuckle angle, and this one also. So at some point this was taken apart, and they put the left on the right and the right on the left. So these control arms will need to be swapped and the alignment readjusted. Just check to make sure all the bolts are tight. If there's not one tight, this little integrated washer on all the screws, you'll hear it rattle. Okay, now for this side, check all the boots. There's no grease squeezing out of any of the boots here. Check these bushings. Bushings are good. This one you can't really tell because it's soaked in grease from the axle. Very good. And this is really under a lot of tension since it's flexed so much this way that you'll see tears start to form out there, but there's nothing there now. So these control arms can still be saved if they're switched back. I can also tell, I wonder if it's been hit in this corner because a lot of this wiring is not routed correctly. You can see this guy's supposed to be, oh, even that bracket's broke, but the wiring's supposed to be inside here and That's all good. That's all good. That upper control arm ball joint looks good. The strut's not leaking. On the other side, strut's not leaking. Upper ball joint is good. Sway bar end links are good. What is this? A piece of felt tape? I don't know what that's about. That says not factory. Okay, so all the suspension is good. Now I look at brakes. The inside pad is thick, but these rotors are very lipped, very. So that tells me this is the second set of pads. And with the Mercedes, and all German cars in general I've seen, but definitely Mercedes, this iron is a very soft compound. Even whenever you're like hammering the rotors off, a lot of times they'll get seized. It's very easy to leave dent marks in the rotor because it's very soft material, so it wears with the pads. So there's a minimum wear thickness, but it usually can't make it through 2 sets of pads. So that tells me this is the second set of pads on the original rotors. Tire tread is good and even, and then the outside pad also matches the inside pad. And you can feel the grooves even in the middle of the rotor too are very aggressive. And the lip on the end I can tell is quite deep. Oh wow, just noticed this metal undershield is bent right there in that corner. And that had to have been an aggressive hit to bend this thing. But it's alright. It's all the bolt holes line up. It's in, it's good. Now the brakes on this side. Pad is still good. The pads are at like 80% life maybe. And then the rotors being like that, definitely a second set of pads on original rotors. Look at the condition of this rotor compared to the other one. The way they just heat cycle, and with there being cross drilled on an iron rotor, I wouldn't try to stretch these rotors out like that. Especially if we're gonna use the car. I mean, depending on how you're driving, you could maybe get away with it if it's a daily driver, but if you went to the track, it would show itself very quickly. So, just a super quick glance up in the fender liner to make sure nothing's crazy or like ripped hanging out. This valve stem cap's missing. We don't have valve stem caps yet, otherwise I would replace that. Okay, so moving on to the bottom of the engine. These tend to be pretty stout. One super common thing with the all-wheel drive AMGs, which this one is the front differential leak, which I can see starting to form extremely slightly, just like mists of like oil vapor. Nothing at all to be concerned about yet. See it from back here pretty good too. It's the pinion housing on the where the drive shaft meets the differential, but it'll be dripping with oil out of this arrow hole here, and it's not. So that's okay for now. You can see the back of the heads from this angle to see if anything's leaking out of the back of the engine. It's not. Some of these engines are very bad about rear main seals. I don't see any oil there. You don't see any oil coming out of these holes. This is just water. All good. Nothing on the transmission's leaking. Transmission cooler lines. All okay. Transfer case looks good. Looks good back here as well. It looks like the transfer case service has been done before because that's not a factory crush washer on the bolt. I mean, it might be a genuine Mercedes one, but it's not like the ones they use from the factory. Okay. Make sure the exhaust isn't rattling anywhere. This valve rattles all the time, but that one seems solid. This bracing has been beat up by whatever it was. One of these owners ran over. The rear flex disc here, super common to rip. You can see little tears starting to form there, but that's nothing to be concerned about yet. But those will spread over time. On the back side as well, no tears at all whatsoever. On the rear, axle boots are good. This is just water vapor because it's raining today. That's not grease. This outer axle boot, same thing. It's air suspension in the rear, so you have a separate airbag and then a strut separate. Strut isn't leaking, brake line's not leaking. Suspension bushings. No tears. Inner bushings, no tears. Diff mounts is good. This isn't a BMW. Inner bushings. And this side rear steering. This is what steers the rear of the tires. Very slight on these cars. Something like 3 point something degrees, I think 4 degrees, something very slight. But these are the little motors. You'll have one on each side that steers the rear wheels a little bit. It's not leaking, no torn bushings back here at all whatsoever. This isn't leaking. Rear brakes, very good, 89%. Rear tires are completely worn out. You can see well past the wear bar on the inside. The 2 inside grooves are the lowest ones. Definitely needs tires. The rears are from 2022. They're just 2 years old, but that's about normal. Outside pads are okay. Rear rotors are also very low. So this is the second set of pads. That's why the pads were so high. So it's on its second set of pads on all original rotors still. Which is okay, as long as they're not too thin. Import direct aftermarket brake pads. So if you hear any squealing, that's where that's from. This tire's also very low. Definitely needs rear tires. And this outside pad is good. So all in all, it looks pretty good underneath. The only things I would recommend are, it's 500 miles overdue on service, so definitely have to get that taken care of. This is bent too, I noticed. Yeah, overdue on service. And as far as under car or under the engine bay, definitely this axle boot, and to swap these control arms back around and readjust the wheel alignment are the only additional things I would recommend. And then now I can get on to the diagnosis of why the car's here. These right here inside the engine bay, they're like little grommets that the engine cover clips into. Well, this is actually part of the engine cover. It's a little ball like that, and it's supposed to pop into these guys and pop back out. But you can see the bottom of it broke off, and that one's completely missing. This is what it's supposed to look like. A little like, basically socket that the ball on the bottom of the engine cover will snap into. But they break all the time, and I'm gonna start stocking those so that I can just like replace these whenever I come across them, because all the time you'll see those ripped out of cars. All right.
Alrighty then. So what is our plans with this test drive?
Well, for one, this is my first time driving the car, and it's also a very important part of all inspections to feel everything in the car and how it works and like how the steering feels. But it kind of feels binding, honestly. Like the power steering is weak, but it's electric, so it's variable. Maybe those lower control arms are binding whenever the knuckles twist back and forth. It feels way heavier towards the end than it normally does. So the oil's not up to temperature yet. I love in Mercedes it shows blue to know that it's cold or considered cold. Anything under operating temp, you never want to like be too hard on the engine. Just kind of drive it normally and let it warm up naturally.
I see.
It's not going like 1.5 boost. So this is at full throttle, and you can see boost isn't even barely make it to half. The max horsepower there was 241. So after that test drive, everything felt perfect, just weaker than it should, substantially. The only code that came back was the knock sensor for bank 1, sensor 2, which is going to be the rear sensor on this bank. So I'm just going to lift it up and visually inspect it and see what's going on with that. It's throwing me off because it says stored code, which it can't be. Like if it's a short circuit to ground, so if it's currently shorted, it should be a current code, but the Mercedes codes are kind of iffy. It kind of gives you the general aspect of what to check, so then you have to know where to go from that. So on these metal undershields, you'll see once I get this off, but all these bolts, they screw into U-nuts, and everyone and their mom that always used impacts on these, like, directly messes them up. So like right here I can feel a lot of pressure on this, so I just twist it till there's no longer pressure on it. That one's good too. So then after that, drive it out with one of these guys. I like to do it where you don't hear any impact motion. It's a smooth twisting out. You can even see the end of all these threads are substantially shinier than the other ends, where they're like machined off, where people will use this to remove the whole thing or put it back in.
Does it anyways.
And then these last two being longer than the other ones. And this shield pops off. You can see here, these two big ones are the only ones that actually have threads into the subframe. All the other ones have these like U-nuts, like the clip-on, like threaded nut certs, and they're very susceptible to easily strip out, especially when you drive it up there with an impact and you have these things twist on the other side and you can't get it out. There's a lot of issues that you run into there. So I like to start them by hand on both disassembly and reassembly. Anyways, now that we're in here, you can tell the last person that did the oil change didn't clean up super well after themselves. Nothing leaking there, just this is the drain plug, it's plastic, one-time use. There's also a drain plug in the oil filter here. You can see it's wet around there, but no one ever takes that out. They just take the oil filter out and let it drain everywhere. Nothing there. You can see the differential a little better here now. This is what I was talking about, how the leak is just starting to form. You can see it's like misty with like dried oil vapor. Absolutely nothing to be concerned about yet. Usually if it's not like forming a droplet of fluid, I don't consider it a leak. So something like that, it could stay like that for years, you know, without causing an issue, but super common thing there.
Damaged ones?
There's supposed to be threads right here where this corner of it attaches, not there. And here's the bolt for the other one. The bolt's still there, but this is ripped out from it. So I guess it might be worth quoting this at this point. You got two threads ripped out. I don't know how I guess I'll try to find that thread insert for this. At least let him see what the price would look like on this, and if he wants to replace it, we can put a new one on for him. So the number 2 knock sensor is up in an area you cannot get to, obviously. Let me see if I can see with the mirror. No, that's the only bolt, I think. Okay, I'll just leave the sensors connected and then take out that one bolt. That's the one, the culprit, the knock sensor in question.
So where is it?
Okay, so the issue with the low boost was the open circuit with the rear knock sensor on this bank. You can see it right up there. This connector laying off to the side. That one. See, that's the knock sensor connector. And let me go grab it. You can see, probably from rodent damage, only one of those wires are connected. You see the green wires? Right there. Okay, so now that both issues have been found, I'm just putting it back together for him, and we'll send the quote and see what he wants to do. Just putting the sensor bracket back up. See that? That's all they need to go to, guys. No impacts. So for the boost codes, I only see 2 fault codes in the ECU, which are not really related to boost, and they're both stored. They're not current codes. So I'm going to chase the current codes that we have now, which is all the driver assistance system packages, and it's all open circuits for the camera system and like underneath the rearview mirror, where it has like the rain light sensor has an open circuit, the multifunction camera has open circuit. So I'm going to take off that trim and make sure all the wires in there are okay and plugged up properly and everything like that to make sure the control unit is getting proper power first. See, you messed up. Okay, so that simply pops down just like that. And then just going to unplug all this so that we can completely remove this overhead control unit, is what Mercedes calls it, of course, because all the nomenclature doesn't make sense in English. one has 3 connectors. On older cars, it would have a plethora of connectors, even at the label. All right, so now looking up in here.
Fluffy.
Sunroof motor, connector for something not related to what I'm looking for. This one that goes to the cameras. All that looks good, so now let's take this out. The guy comes out first, and then this one comes out. Okay, so upon first inspection, I don't like this. Even if this wasn't an issue, I don't like having wires like this. Some of these wires are not simply like 12-volt ground signal. These are like communication lines that'll send signals through themselves, or in the newer cars, they'll have literal Ethernet cables communicating back and forth on here. But some of these, the slightest resistance in anything will distort the signal. It's not simply like voltage signals, like it literally talks across these communication lines. So if you have any kind of resistance at all, even if you're making good connection and the resistance is off, it won't communicate right. I'm gonna pull out a voltmeter and a wiring diagram and poke a couple of these wires and see if they're making good connection or not. My guess is they're not, judging by there's open circuit faults for these exact cameras, and the wires look like this. So in conclusion, the driver assistance systems messages ended up being the wires with going to the camera. The repair on those wasn't good enough, and it's hard to get them good enough on so many wires too, where every single connection has to be perfect. So we're either going to quote a new wiring harness or a pin replacement for those, and just cut off that whole wire and just do new pins on each one of those, and that'll fix it. And then, of course, for the knock sensor, the same thing. So a pin replacement on that thing. I measured the harness to make sure that there's enough room for it, so there won't be any strain on the wires. So basically, we're going to quote out repinning several of the connectors to fix both these issues for them.